Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. The BC provincial government just enacted part 2 of their crackdown on short-term rentals. We're going to talk about what effect this is going to have on the real estate market and specifically what might happen with real estate supply and prices. Real quick before we get started, if this is your first time to the channel, my name is Hassan. I'm a real estate agent in the Vancouver area and I make educational real estate content to help you on your real estate journey. When I'm not making videos like this, I'm helping people just like you buy and sell real estate across the Lower Mainland. So if that sounds interesting to you and you wanted to chat with me one-on-one about your real estate situation, you can book me for a free call in the Calendly link below or on screen and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a future video. All right, so we're gonna hop right into it. BC enacts phase 2 of its short-term rental legislation. In order to really understand what's gonna happen with the real estate market, let's jump back to what happened last year in phase 1 of the crackdown. So the provincial government, they announced new legislation at the end of 2023 is when they actually came out with the announcement, October, November, but they were announcing changes that were coming into place for May 1st of last year, 2024. And the big change that was basically being announced was that you would no longer be able to short-term rent a property as a host unless it was your principal residence. And this basically affected most communities across BC, communities that have residents, 10,000 plus residents or within close proximity to those communities, with some exceptions for, resort towns, ski resorts, those types of things. But it was drastic changes to the short-term rental policies and legislation on top of whatever cities and municipalities were legislating for their communities. So this was layered on top, and it was basically a crackdown because of what we had seen happening with the housing crisis, but specifically what was happening with rents and long-term rents climbing right out of COVID for the last 2 or 3 years, outside of the last year, which we'll talk about in a sec. But rents were climbing; they were getting out of control. Provincial government is like, how do we address this? We need to put some protections in place. We need to change the legislation when it comes to short-term rental restrictions. They were likely watching communities and cities, big cities across North America, making changes to their own Airbnb and short-term rental policies. So BC announces it last year. And as part of that announcement, so they announced the change for May 1st, and the enforcement piece was basically a registry that the province was going to create, and short-term renters, hosts would have to, register into the registry. And this is basically the compliance piece. This is how they're actually going to monitor and track. When they announced the rule changes last year, May 1st, they said, for now, you have to upload your business license number to your listing on Airbnb, VRBO, whatever the site might be. We want to see your business license number uploaded on it. And until they had this registry created where people will actually get a registration number. So what was just announced was that short-term rental registry, which is going to come into effect on May 1st. And so now if you own a property that you are renting short-term, and short-term as it's defined by the province is any rental that is less than 90 days. So if you're renting short-term, you have to create an account on this site, register, get a registration number, and that will then be posted to your listings. And you have to have that done as of May 1st. As of June 1st, those that are not compliant will get pulled off of the site. Now, a couple of other pieces to this announcement and to this crackdown. With this registry, of course, you might have guessed it, there are costs associated. So how it's working for an annual charge to actually register on this compliance site, you're looking at anywhere from $100 to $600 per year, depending on what type of property you are renting out. If it's your own home, your own principal residence that you specifically live in, perhaps you're renting out a room short-term, it's $100 per year. If it is a secondary suite or a laneway that you're renting out short-term, it's $450 per year. And if it's what's called a stratified hotel, that's $600 per year. So a compliance site is launched, you're going to have to pay for that compliance. That's on top of any business licensing fees you may have through a city. So if we take City of Vancouver, for instance, their licensing fee is just over $1,000. Suppose you're renting that secondary suite short-term, or you're renting, the laneway, you're paying $1,400 to $1,500 per year just in fees to be able to rent short term. Now, when they first announced these changes last year in May, I came out and said, I believe this is the death of the secondary suite as a long-term rental. I did not feel that it made any more sense now to rent that long term, especially with the way the tenancy laws in BC are. And even my discussions with clients, a lot of folks were saying, look, I don't want to rent my own basement suite anymore long term. I don't want to get stuck with a bad tenant. They're living, under my roof. I don't want to have to deal with that. At the same time, the province was launching a secondary suite program, trying to encourage people to create and build secondary suites by offering essentially loans, paying half the amount to be able to construct the suites, provided that you rented it at lower than market value for a period of 5 years. I thought that program would not have any teeth, any legs. I couldn't see people actually signing up for it. I felt like the short-term rental was now going to dominate that secondary suite. The reason I mentioned that is now we see that, the fee associated, the $450 for the annual fee, it's really the provincial government trying to encourage people with the fees and the regulation and the compliance to not rent short-term. Don't rent the secondary suite short-term. Don't rent the laneway short-term. Keep it as a long-term. You're going to keep your costs down. So that's where it's swinging. Now, to answer the broad question here, now that we have this compliance metric coming into place May 1st, what does this mean for, real estate supply and real estate prices? Well, I mentioned that the bones of this legislation was launched last year, May 1st. And so what we saw from October, November 2023, when we knew this was coming, up until May 1st of last year, that's when we saw a big glut of condos, especially in the Vancouver area, downtown Vancouver, Vancouver proper, close to the city center. That's when we saw a lot of these listings hit the market. Some of these, short-term rental properties immediately went on the rental market under long-term to try and get a long-term tenant in place. A huge chunk of them actually just went straight to the market to sell because they didn't want any long-term tenants in place. So at that time, we'll say Q1, Q2 2024, that's when we saw some real significant inventory in the condo space. We saw the condo inventory pile up. And you could see that because the amount of furnished rentals skyrocketed during that time. So we know that these short-term furnished rentals were being put onto the long-term market. So a lot of the inventory supply from these rule changes has already kind of moved and filtered its way through the market last year in 2024. In my experience, most operators became compliant by May or June of last year. They were following the policy, even though there wasn't that compliance metric yet in place. They knew it was coming, and actually some people were surprised by this announcement because it took quite some time for this registry to be created, but most people were compliant. A couple of weeks ago, the province was basically sending compliance letters to approximately 1,500 operators that were not following the new rules and the new guidelines across BC, 1,500, and a vast majority of those were brought to light by people complaining about short-term rentals, Airbnb. So it wasn't the province going and knocking doors and figuring out who's still doing it. It was a lot of correspondence coming into the province. But again, 1,500 that they're working on that time. So as we move towards May 1st, we move towards this compliance measure. Just how much more supply are we going to see actually come into the market? I think it's a very relatively small number in terms of how many folks are still operating illegally or not following the rules when it comes to short-term rentals. So I don't particularly see all of a sudden we're going to see what we saw last year, this glut of condo listings, furnished listings, a whole bunch of condos. And this is separate from what we've seen real estate-wise with new building constructions over the last 6 to 8 months, with buyers buying in pre-sale thinking they're going to sell for a profit, realizing there's no profit there, and then flipping their units to the rental market. So last year was pretty much a perfect storm for the rental market because you saw these units hitting the market, completing, brand new, no profit to be made. If sold today, they'd be sold at a loss. So they hit the rental market. Short-term rental legislation changes, so those units now hit the long-term rental market. And so we saw this perfect storm of activity, which basically allowed for rents to stabilize and in fact fall year over year. So again, as we head towards May 1st, I'm not expecting any significant inventory to hit the market. I think, again, vast majority of people are compliant, have been compliant for some time now. And in terms of condo prices, and we'll talk specifically condo because tends to be the more popular, Airbnb style product, I guess, close to downtown. I expect condo prices are going to continue to remain flat. There's going to be no drastic, fluctuations for that, because again, we're not going to have this flood of inventory hitting the market. Now, overall, when it comes to phase 2 of this legislation, I've been speaking with quite a few people, not just in the industry, but clients and people that are just interested in real estate. And there's definitely two schools of thought. There are the folks that believe that this is a good thing for rental prices and for housing supply. It's going to encourage more people to have long-term tenancies, long-term rental supply on the market. It's going to encourage that. So it's going to continue to have that, downward pressure on rents, which, had gotten so high year over year again after that COVID period. Then you have the second school of thought, which you often do when it comes to any sort of housing legislation. The second school of thought that looks at it and says, we have this registry, we have to register now to be compliant. Why the annual fee? Why is there yet another fee? And I think a lot of the angst, at least in my discussions, it's not so much this particular line item and this particular fee, but it's a reminder of all the other taxes and fees that get placed on housing, whether it's BC spec and vacancy tax, whether it's empty homes tax, whether it's underused housing tax, whether it's the school tax, which is essentially a tax on property, whether it's a fee on short-term rental legislation, whatever it might be, it just piles up, and people are wondering, when is it ever going to end? Is it ever going to stop? Now, before I sign out, I joined CBC's BC Today show to talk about short-term rental legislation. So if you're interested in checking out that video, I'll link to it either on screen or in the notes below. And I want to hear your opinion on what you think about the short-term legislation. So please place your comments and your questions below. So I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, hit the like button. What that does is it takes the video and it sends it out to more people so they can also learn from it. And if you enjoy weekly real estate content, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss next week's video. And lastly, again, if you're in the Vancouver area or the Fraser Valley, you want to chat with me one-on-one about your real estate situation, you can book me for a call or you can just give me a call. Send me a text, shoot me an email, whatever is easiest for you. I'd love to chat with you. But I want to thank you for watching this week's video, and I look forward to seeing you next week.